Hey guys, we're your hosts. I'm Jess,
And I'm Fenella.
and this is Cozy Crime Club. Each episode, we explore real cases from the eerie to the outrageous with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humour. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger. Grab a blanket and settle in. Welcome to the club.
Welcome back, club members. We're here for another episode of Cozy Crime Club, and as usual, we have mugs in hand, detective hats on. Tonight, there is a lot to discuss. Stay with us as we dive into the story of one of the most notorious crime sprees in Australian history. We will cover themes of family violence, general violence, and murder. If that isn't quite what you're up for tonight, click away now. If you're sticking around, like last week, we're back in Perth, Australia.
Ah,
Yes. But this time we are rewinding to the cusp of the 50s and 60s. Perth in the late 1950s was a place wrapped in sunshine and optimism. The city, one of the most isolated in the world, had shrugged off the long shadow of war. Populations were swelling with the baby boom and immigrants arriving from Europe, and people spoke of Perth as if it were a promise, a place to live well, raise a family, and grow old in peace. Long summers meant children roamed barefoot to the beach or the river, the only rule being that dinner might be waiting when the sun went down. Parents thought nothing of leaving doors unlocked, windows flung wide open, and some even carried their bedding outside to sleep under the stars. A local detective would later sum up the time with a blunt understatement. His job, he said, was boring. Very boring. Perth seemed charmed, sheltered, and untouchable. Until that illusion cracked. January 27th, 1963. Australia Day had ended only hours before. The air was still warm from barbecues, concerts, and fireworks over the Swan River. Perth was drowsy with celebration. At Cottesloe, a young couple parked near the sand, basking in the heavy night air, doing what young lovers do in summer. Elsewhere, an accountant finally surrendered to sleep, seeking rest ahead of another working week. Across town in Nedlands, an 18-year-old student curled on the veranda of his boarding house. The air outside was cooler, and like many Australians, he chose the open air as refuge. On another street nearby, a retired grocer stirred at the sound of a doorbell. And then, shots. By sunrise, Perth had woken to horror. The couple, the accountant, the student, the grocer, struck down in the small hours for no reason anyone could grasp. The newspapers spread the news with bold type. Perth, the safe city, had bled in the night. The reaction was swift and visceral. Locks appeared on doors that had never been locked. Windows were shut tight. Families brought dogs for protection. Nights once filled with laughter, now with unease. 2 weeks later, another pair of murders struck. The sense of randomness was unbearable. The freedom that had defined Perth evaporated almost overnight. Soon, police announced an arrest. Brian Robinson was caught, processed, and tried for one of the killings. The court sentenced him to hang. The city was relieved, thinking maybe it's all over, things can get back to normal. And Perth did try settle back into its old routines and habits, but a quiet undercurrent of dread remained. 10th of August 1963, that same year, dread came roaring back to the forefront. In Dalkeith, 18-year-old Shirley MacLeod was babysitting. She had taken the job to support herself, stacking cash towards a kind of bright future everyone who met her imagined that she'd have. With medium dark hair, bright eyes, and a quick smile, she was the kind of young woman people described as radiant. Born on January 26, 1945, making her an Aquarius, she was hardworking, kind, and brimming with potential. That night, she watched over sleeping children in a quiet home, the sort of job where nothing ever happened. Then, from the dark outside, a rifle cracked. The bullet pierced the house, struck her in the head, and ended her life in an instant. The shock was unbearable. Perth was asking aloud the things that had been whispering since January. If even a babysitter working a respectful job in a quiet suburb could be killed at random, who was safe? Shirley's death undid what little calm had returned after Robinson's hanging, and the city recoiled once more. Doors were locked, windows were bolted, neighbors eyed one another with suspicion. People began to whisper, had the wrong man been caught? Police, for their part, never stopped looking. The killings bore the mark of a .22 caliber rifle, and so they combed the city. They collected and tested over 60,000 rifles, which is staggering when you remember that at the time, Perth's population was only around 450,000. So more than 13% of households were affected by this process. They also gathered fingerprints from 30,000 boys and men aged 12 years and up. There were no results that matched what they were looking for. For 4 years, Perth had been peppered with other strange, violent acts. Hit and runs that left victims broken in the street, burglaries that seemed to serve no purpose but invasion, strangulations, stabbings, and even necrophilia. Each scene was different. Sometimes the homes were ransacked and other times nothing was taken. In one case, the killer lingered long enough to drink a lemonade from the victim's fridge, enjoying it before leaving. Very casual. And police could not find a pattern. To their minds, this could be several offenders, even copycats. But the only certainty for them was that fear controlled their city. When Shirley MacLeod was murdered, police scoured the area. Hidden in bushes nearby, they found a .22 caliber rifle, the same kind used before. They swapped it out for a dummy rifle and waited. 3 weeks later, just after midnight on September 1st, 1963, detectives on a stakeout saw a short, dark-haired man moving suspiciously through the dark, nearer and nearer to the bushes where the real weapon had once been. The officers slipped from their positions, surrounded him, and made the arrest. His name was Edgar Cooke, 32 years old, married, father of 7. And as Perth would soon discover, the horrors of that year were only the tip of his story. When police pulled him from the shadows in September 1963, Edgar Cooke did not look like a monster. He was slight, not tall, not broad, with a mop of dark hair and a face that did not stick in memory. The ordinary face masked a life soaked in rage and rejection. And to understand the crimes, you have to step back through the years of Eric Cooke's life. Because it didn't start with murder, it started with pain. Eric was born on February 25th, 1931. He entered the world already marked by difference. His lip and palate were cleft, and though doctors operated when he was 3 months old, and again later as he grew, the scars remained. His speech never smoothed out, his smile never sat even, and at school, those differences made him an easy target. Children are experts at cruelty. They mocked his scars, mimicked his voice, shut him out of games. School was no refuge, and neither was home.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know, it really is sad. When I was researching this, there were a lot of moments where I just thought, oh gosh, that is just the most sad thing I've ever heard.
You just picture it getting bullied in the schoolyard. It's just, I don't know who this person is or if he is a killer. I mean, currently that's real sad.
It is. Now, Eric's father, Vivian, was an alcoholic with fists like weapons. He despised his son. He saw weakness in him and punished it daily. Eric's mother, too frightened and exhausted, avoided home whenever she could. She worked long hours, left the children to fend for themselves, and Eric was alone with a man whose temper never cooled. And Eric found his own hiding places. Under the house, in the crawl space where the dark at least didn't hit him. Out in the streets, wandering through the night until it was late. By 6 years old, he had been expelled from his first school for stealing. Teachers labeled him disruptive. Classmates jeered at him. His father beat him. His mother withdrew. And everywhere he turned, rejection waited. And yet, Eric still sought to belong. As a teenager, he joined the Scarborough Junior Surf Lifesaving Club. But one day, he stole a watch, tried to fake an engraving on it, and make it look like a gift from his teammates. The club knew that they hadn't given him the watch, and so the lie did unravel. He was also expelled from the club because turns out the watch was stolen from a locker at the club.
So sad. That is so sad.
It is actually so sad, but also, what are you doing? But yes, it really pulled at my heartstrings.
Eric, what are you doing?
Too much, I think. Later, he actually auditioned for a choir, a church choir. But he was rejected again. In retaliation, he burned down the church.
Oh.
I believe he actually did end up serving 18 months in prison for that one. No one was hurt from what I could tell, but I mean, you can't just burn a building down. This definitely became a pattern. Every time he reached out, he was pushed away, and every time he pushed away, he lashed out. By adolescence, his anger had hardened into delinquency. He was breaking into houses, stealing cars, lighting fires. By the time he was 17, police had caught him for some other crimes, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. So he gets out at around 21 years old. Just for context, for anyone listening, 18-year-old males were obliged to sign up for the army. It was a requirement. Eric, though, had slightly missed the boat. He wasn't 18 at the time of the draft. Equally, though, he was also in prison, so he couldn't have signed up anyway. So, shortchanged on that one. But when he was released from prison, he thought, you know what? I'm going to sign up to the army anyway. I'm going to sign up now. They need all the young men they can get. And so he did. He volunteered for the army. And for a short while, he seemed to have found his place. The discipline suited him. The structure gave him purpose. He was actually doing really well. Within just a couple months, they had advanced him to rifle training or shadowing.
I got that little clue.
Yeah. However, this did not last long because his past did catch up with him. His criminal record surfaced and the army discharged him. Another rejection and another slammed door. However, it wasn't all loneliness for Eric. In 1953, he met and married a woman named Sarah, also known as Sally, a kind, loyal woman who believed in him, and together they built a family. They had 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters. Neighbors saw an ordinary man, a husband, a father, a man patching work together to provide for his family. But inside, things were stormy. His son Tony would later say that he was unpredictable, sometimes kind, sometimes terrifying. And poverty pressed close. Eviction was always near. Sarah endured his moods and temper, raising their children under a shadow that never lifted. By day, Cooke was a husband and father. By night, he prowled. He stole cars, joyriding through Perth's streets. Sometimes he returned them without a scratch, and other times he wrecked them completely. He broke into houses, taking whatever he liked. Coins, trinkets, food. Sometimes he stole nothing at all. One joyride ended in a crash that injured him badly. The police caught him, and he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor in Fremantle prison, which, Jess, I believe you've been there?
And that was just last month, actually. I got a souvenir. You know me with mugs. The Fremantle prison. This is what it looks like. And I'm sure we'll have a picture anyway.
No, that's all we will have is your mug.
You gotta look at YouTube to be able to see this. Yeah, did a tour there. And shout out to the tour guide there. He was phenomenal. We were all hooked.
Jess, you've been to the prison. Eric was in Fremantle. He learned a lesson. Wear gloves, leave no fingerprints, leave no trace. When he came out, he was sharper, more careful, and deliberate. The crimes escalated. Burglaries became assaults. Assaults became stabbings. Stabbings gave way to shootings, strangulations, and running people down with cars. There was no single pattern to his behavior or his crimes. He was targeting men, women, the young, the old. He was killing in homes, on streets. His weapons shifted. Sometimes it was guns, knives, blunt objects, vehicles. Police, searching for patterns, missed him every time. By the time detectives caught him creeping towards the rifle in 1963, Cooke had haunted Perth for years. He'd lived 2 lives, one as a husband and father, one as a phantom. And when they finally sat him down in interrogation, they didn't yet know how many horrors he would confess to. Because Eric Edgar Cooke was not just a murderer. He was a catalogue of violence, a man whose confessions would spill out for days, shocking even the most hardened detectives who listened. At first, Cooke denied everything. But the detectives were not buying it. One detective, Max Baker, confronted Eric with his legacy directly, saying, "You will hang. Think of your wife. Think of your children. Do you want to go to the gallows like a mongrel dog or like a man?" The words sliced deeper than any weapon, and Cooke's composure cracked. His head dropped, his shoulders slumped, and then, hesitating at first, he began to speak. What followed stunned the room. For 2 full days, Cooke talked without pause, as if years of secrets had finally demanded release. He confessed to burglaries, and not just a handful, by the way, hundreds of burglaries. He described break-ins where he stole items as prizes. He described times where he took nothing at all. He admitted to prowling through strangers' bedrooms while they slept, standing silently in the dark before leaving, as though invading itself was the prize. He confessed to arson, stealing cars, vehicles wrecked and abandoned like toys. And then came the murders. Cooke spoke about killing John Sturkey, the accountant shot in his bed. He recounted gunning down George Walmsley, the retired grocer who answered his front door to a bullet. He admitted to murdering Shirley MacLeod, the teenage babysitter struck through the skull by a single shot as she watched over sleeping children.
They're all the people that you mentioned in the very beginning, right? Some of the first murders that were realised in Perth. Wow, I'm all of a sudden thinking about poor Brian, okay?
I know, I was right there where you are. I did look into it, and from what I could tell, he was actually convicted of a murder that he did commit. I think because it happened so close to the other murders, they just put two and two together that he was also responsible for the others. Police had been searching for patterns, and they'd assumed there were multiple killers, but every crime did indeed lead back to this one man. And by the end of his confessions, the numbers were staggering. More than 200 burglaries, I think actually 250 or more burglaries, 8 murders, 14 attempted murders. So part of those attempted murders are when he was trying to run people down in the street, there were survivors. He would just kind of do a hit and run and move on. So some of them survived.
This was chaotic.
It's total chaos.
You just don't hear about. Usually, if there's someone who's murdered more than one person, there's somewhat of a pattern. I don't think I've ever really heard of someone who's just literally chaotically like driving, like, oh my god, there's someone, I'm gonna run them down. Like just right here, right now. It's just
Totally. Detectives struggled to keep up with the sheer volume of his confessions and the detail because he seemed to remember everything. On November 25th, 1963, Eric Edgar Cooke stood trial in the Supreme Court of Western Australia. He faced 7 charges of willful murder. Now, there were 8 murders that he confessed to, but you can only really be tried for ones that can be proven. So he faced 7 charges of willful murder. Asked about his Australia Day spree, he painted a terrifying picture. He recounts that morning as completely normal. He was helping around the house, doing chores, spent some time playing with the children. When asked what happened next, Cooke replied, "It was then that this power came over me. It wasn't an impulse. It was stronger than an impulse. It was as though I was God, like a mantle or like a cloud came over me. And I must use that." His lawyers argued that he was insane. They said he suffered from schizophrenia, his mind twisted beyond reason. They described a man broken from birth, incapable of true choice. The state countered with its own experts. The director of mental health testified that Cooke was sane, fully aware of his actions, and independent psychiatric examination was not permitted. On November 27th, the jury retired to deliberate. And after just an hour, I believe it was maybe an hour and 4 minutes, they returned. The verdict was in, guilty.
he said, I actually murdered 8 people. Obviously, his defense were like, he's crazy.
Insane.
So was he like, yeah, I'm insane?
He didn't have a personal lawyer. He had a legal aid, so he couldn't afford his own lawyer. They decided that the best defense would be insanity.
I can see why they're saying he was insane. Like, it's just so random and chaotic. But he seems, to me at least, not that way. And it seems like he just confessed because he wanted to. It's just weird that, a lawyer comes in, they're like, no.
I don't know how much control the client has over the defense that is provided to them, particularly if they are not paying them. Because from the lawyer's point of view, they want to win the case or present a really good case and be hired again in future. He didn't appeal the charges or anything, so he was sentenced. As I mentioned, the verdict came back. He was guilty, and he just said that's fine. He told his lawyer, "I deserve to die. I've taken lives without reason, and now my life should be taken in return." That is not a direct quote, but that is essentially what he told them. Now, although he did confess and he didn't move to appeal the verdict, he was accepting of his fate. I did find actually that his wife, Sarah, she actually had given an interview with a journalist in which she spoke of Eric, asking her to be his alibi. I remember it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he'd been reading the paper in bed. And he called me in and said, "Look at this." Sarah said, "Oh, how dreadful, another murder." And he simply said yes. "Now, you know with the record I've got, right?" Sarah responded, "Yes." He said, "Well, if anyone comes checking up, would you please tell them that I was home early and that we spent the night with relatives? Because with my record, they won't be fussy and they'll pin it right on me." Coupled with his initial denials, where he did hope to get away with everything, and the fact that he at some point had asked his wife to be his alibi in advance of being captured, it's not as though he didn't have self-preservation instincts, even though he did, confess and he accepted his fate when the verdict came back guilty. I do still believe that if he thought it would be easy to get away with it, if his denials would have worked quickly, he would have just carried on. I don't think he would have ever turned himself in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there was anything that we've known about him so far that would suggest that he would come forward and just be like, I'm handing myself in. I don't think that was ever going to happen. And like you said as well, he was like early 30s. He's still got his full prime to cause as much havoc as he wants to if he was not caught.
Exactly. I feel like that one's kind of 50-50 for some people, but I agree with you. I don't think that he was going to just say, lock me up or anything.
If you have a different take, let us know.
Yeah, do let us know. Now, the verdict did come back guilty, and the sentence was death by hanging. For Perth, it was justice. For Cooke, it seemed to him that it was inevitable. On October 26, 1964, guards led Eric to the gallows. The heavy timber frame stood waiting, the rope dangling. But minutes before his death, Cooke made one final declaration. He swore on the Bible that two men, who had already been convicted of murders, were innocent. He claimed that he had committed those murders. The two men were named John Button and Daryl Beamish. Button had been jailed for a hit and run that actually killed his girlfriend, Rosemary Anderson. Beamish, a deaf mute, had been convicted of killing socialite Gillian Brewer. Cooke insisted, in the final hour, that those were his crimes and not theirs. Officials dismissed him as a liar, playing one last game. The hangman placed the noose. Cooke fell. His body was buried in Fremantle Cemetery, above the grave of Martha Rendell, the last woman executed in Western Australia. And with him, an era ended. Cooke was the final man hanged in the state. But his story did not end with a rope, because his last words about Button and Beamish would echo for decades. Cooke was gone, but the words he spoke in his final minutes refused to die. He had sworn on the Bible that two men, John Button and Daryl Beamish, were innocent. No one believed him, but Cooke, it seems, had told the truth. In 1963, while Eric Cooke had been going on his rampages, John Button had been a young man, madly in love with his girlfriend, Rosemary. They had argued one night. Rosemary stormed out. She was walking home. She'd had enough. Minutes later, she was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver. The police at the time focused on Button. They pressed him, wore him down, told him he must have done it in a fit of rage. And under pressure, he confessed. His confession was shaky, inconsistent, the words of a frightened young man. But it was enough. He was convicted and sentenced.
That is horrible. He would have been so upset, like, that his girlfriend was even killed, and he'd probably thinking, we were just talking, she was in my presence, and then I let her go, and then she was killed.
In his final confession, Cooke had admitted that actually it had been him. He described the stolen car. He described the street, so many details that only the killer would know. But still the courts dismissed him at the time, and Button stayed in prison. So this confession did not result in a revisiting by the courts or by the legal system of John's case, which is terrifying to know that that can happen. It would actually take nearly 4 decades and advances in crash forensics before the experts proved that Cooke's confession was true. And Button's conviction was finally overturned in 2002.
Oh, what was he, like 60? Whoa. And it was overturned.
Overturned in 2002. He's really lost the bulk of his life, right? Can you even imagine being convicted of something you did not do?
I cannot at all.
I feel like we could do a whole case just on that. And I might do a follow-up on these two guys, like in detail. They carried the guilt of something that Cooke had done for all those years, and that is horrific. Now, Daryl Beamish, his story is no less tragic. Deaf and mute, Beamish was just 18 when police accused him of killing a wealthy socialite, Gillian Brewer, in 1959. So this is 4 years before Cooke was captured and found guilty. She had been found bludgeoned and stabbed in her bed. Investigators, eager for a suspect, seized on Beamish. They claimed that he had signed confessions. They called him violent, unstable, and the court believed them. He was convicted of willful murder, and he was sentenced to death. However, this was later commuted to life in prison. So Beamish would remain branded a killer for 44 years. He was actually in prison longer than John. He was finally, only in 2005, 3 years after John's case was overturned, his conviction was quashed. By then, his youth and what could have been was long gone. Very, very sad case.
It's so sad.
Yeah. I also just think, on just a side note there, he is deaf and he is mute, and I just feel he would have been so frustrated because there's already so much frustration in not being able to communicate in the way everyone around you is communicating, to sort of be there in silence with these horrible feelings, life passing you by, and
definitely adds another layer.
yeah. Now, Cooke's victims had families too, and their grief endured long after headlines faded. For them, there was no closure, only the hollow space left by violence. For the MacLeods, the loss of Shirley was a wound that never closed. For the families of Sturkey and Walmsley, their loved ones were not symbols of randomness, but fathers, uncles, friends, gone forever. Even Cooke's own family bore scars. His wife, Sarah, left alone to raise 7 children, carried the shame of his crimes alongside the burden of survival. And their children grew up haunted by a surname forever linked to violence. His son Tony would later reflect publicly, calling his father a deeply damaged, made monster, unpredictable even at home. And Tony's own life became a mission to break that legacy, to serve in unions and community work, to choose the path opposite from the one his father had walked. And I did read as well that he mentioned that he actually delayed having a family of his own. I think he started having children at around 38 because he just didn't know if he was in a place where he could avoid repeating the patterns that he had lived through. I thought that was extremely self-aware and interesting to note, because so often people do not reflect in that way.
Yeah. And selfless. I mean, this is 2025. We talk about breaking generational patterns and traumas. And it's amazing that he made that decision so long ago before this was kind of everyday speak. That's just amazing. Very, very self-aware.
Perth itself was changed forever. Before Cooke, Perth was carefree. After Cooke, the innocence was gone. Where windows once were left open, now they were barred. For a generation, the phrase "the Nedlands monster" or "the Phantom of Perth" conjured a shiver. Parents warned their children. Couples thought twice before parking in quiet spots. The idea that Perth was an oasis, removed and isolated from the world's violence, had been shattered. October 26, 1964, Cooke became the last man to hang in Western Australia. And honestly, fair. His death closed an era. Capital punishment would fade from the state soon after. His crimes still ripple through the city's memory, through the families who grieved, through the men who lost decades in prison for what he had done, and what was once described as boring, very boring police work became a city braced for shadows. The Phantom of Perth is gone, but the fear he sowed lingers on. It seemed that Eric wasn't wanted anywhere, and so he wanted everything. Cars, coins, trinkets, and lives. While we can have empathy for the unwanted boy with the cleft lip, what do you make of the man who committed the crimes? Did you already know about this case, or have you just heard the awful details for the first time with us tonight? And either way, what stood out to you the most? Or maybe you're still reeling from the awful laundry list of Eric's crimes and transgressions. It's a lot to take in and get your head around. But now, with tonight's case said and done, it's time to return to our realities. And let's meet again next week, same time and place, for another story, another case.
Thanks for getting cozy with us today, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share the club with a friend. You can join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify, because here we leave the kettle on and the comments open. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.